first of all, everyone, thank you for joining us on this lovely Thursday evening. Thank you for giving us, your time and evening to come join us to where we're going to be here talking about football, talking about tactics, talking about the thing that we love the most, and this is something that we thought we haven't seen much of. There's a lot of this on men's football, but why not get this done for women's football? So welcome to the first edition of Honeyball, as we've called it. And we're going to be discussing Sarina Wiegman and the Lionesses and see kind of how she's going to transform them, so to speak, when she takes over the job next year. But before we begin anywhere, I want to introduce the two lovely people who have agreed to do this with me, and who were the part brains behind the operations, and the ones who I thought were just amazing people. So girls, give it away. Please introduce yourselves to the crowd.
Jessy, you want to go first?
Sure. So I'm Jessy Parker Humphreys. I write about women's football for the Offside Rule. I first got into writing about women's football when I did my master's at LSE in sociology. I did my dissertation on grassroots women's football, and it's kind of there. I've also written about more general football, men's football, lots of variety of things for places like The Independent, the Totally Football Show, and the Blizzard. That's me.
Excellent.
I'm Alex. I'm American Chilean. As you see, I don't really have a British accent, but I am based in the UK, writing about women's football, mainly for Vavel, for the Equalizer as well, a site in the States. And that's pretty much it. I just completed my master's in sports journalism, which is why I kind of find myself in the UK. So here I am, really indulged in everything, and my Hispanic roots kind of just cemented me into football. I really had no choice. And here I am making the most of it, I guess.
Fair enough. That's excellent. Some of you may or may not know me. My name is Abdullah. I write for Total Football Analysis, and that's kind of where I write for the most part. Do tactical analysis. I've been writing for about just over 2 years now. This is unlike these two. This is not my full-time job, which I wish it was. I'm an operation analyst by the day, and I'm a tactical analyst by night. I've got a marketing degree. I work in operations, so everything is just completely left field different. But here we are today. It is what it is. So, without further ado, let's get into the whole thing, and let's kind of talk about why we're here and what we're kind of doing. Oh, and just before I forget, if you guys got any questions that you want to ask, throw it into the chat, and towards the end we'll kind of get to it when we get into the discussion part of the webinar. So what we came here to talk about today is, what are Sarina Wiegman's tactics and how might they apply to the Lionesses? Just kind of give a brief background on Sarina. She obviously was the first Dutch footballer to gain 100 caps. She retired in 2003, and her managerial career kind of started at Ter Lede and ADO Den Haag. Please excuse the pronunciations because they're going to be very, very bad. So you can have to bear with me, please. She became, in 2014, she became the assistant manager of the national team. In 2016, she became, the head coach, and kind of in her first major tournament at Euro 2017, she won Euro 2017 on home soil. And in the 2019 Women's World Cup, she guided them to a runner-up place. So not bad for her two first major tournaments in the second place finish. So I guess that's one of the reasons why I would say, the FA wanted to appoint her as the coach. I think so the way we're gonna do this is yes, DK, just to quickly check the chat. Yes, this is the new Dutch kit, in case you were wondering. We're gonna split this up into 3 sections. So we're gonna talk about the defensive and off the ball tactics. We're gonna be talking about the build-up play, and we're going to be talking about the final third tactics before we kind of delve into what we think the future England national team is going to look like. So I'll be taking it away with the defensive and off the ball part, followed by Jess, and then Alex with the build up and final third tactics. So Jess, if we can have the first slide, please, in our fancy presentation.
Yep, just give me a second.
Yeah, we did prepare a presentation. We did come prepared, people. Don't worry about it. So here we are. So kind of to begin with, the Dutch kind of play a 4-3-3 system. I mean, that's kind of been the mainstay kind of since 2017. They haven't really changed that much. It's kind of been the same sort of shape, kind of on and off the ball. They haven't really changed much. So it's the only thing that's changed is maybe the personnel here and there, which is obviously normal. But for the most part, you're holding up into a 4-3-3. And then the kind of the main idea behind the 4-3-3, defensively speaking, is they want to keep everything compact. They want to keep the central spaces. They want to keep everything narrow. Make the opposition play through the wide areas. Kind of, and it's one thing's been interesting is they kind of do the same thing between whether they're playing the smaller teams, so-called smaller teams, or they play against the bigger teams. So if I take the example of Euro 2017 final against Denmark, or whether it was the US in the final in 2019. They kind of played a very similar system. So if you can look at the first, board that we have here in place, this is a general setup that they have. They want to have the back four pretty close and compact together, with the distance between the midfield and the defense not too wide. They'll have more of it. They'll have a slightly more of a gap between attack and midfield, but kind of defensively, they want to have as many numbers as possible to kind of keep that numerical superiority and not allow teams to play through the middle. Now, if you look at this example, the opposition, now they won't press high, when we'll get into the pressing later. The opposition will kind of say, okay, we don't really have space in the middle to go through. If they do go through the middle, then the Dutch can easily, have for the most part, they'll kind of win the first or second ball and go from there. But in here, they'll either want to go straight into the wingers, in which case you'll see that the two fullbacks are close enough to either show them on the outside and, kind of delay the team long enough for support to arrive, or the opposition will play it into the fullbacks. Now, if they play it into the fullbacks, again, this just gives the Dutch time to kind of set themselves up and not give any spaces away. Now, I think for the most part, I think what the obvious thing is here, while they are all in the central areas, the wings are empty. So what will happen is the number 7 in this image, and then the number 11, they'll kind of shift across a little bit, kind of get their presence away. They won't press them hard, but they'll just kind of put their presence in there. And if the ball does come in field, because a lot of teams aren't going to be playing completely down the wings, they're more central focused. In the case of Denmark, they were really a team that likes playing through the middle because they have Pernille Harder and Nadia Nadim, who were the two strikers, and for the most part, they really wanted to get those two involved, and those two aren't really great receivers of the ball from wide areas, and the Dutch would obviously take them from there. So they really wanted to keep the central areas compact. Obviously, that game ended up being a goal fest. It was 4-2 at the end of the day, but the gist of the plan was kind of, you could see it from there. And then if we go to the second image. Now, I specifically want to talk about the back four and kind of how they set up. So essentially what happens is when the opposition want to build up, and like we said, they want to force them out to the wide areas, one of the fullbacks will push up a little. So if the ball is, say, going into a winger or to a fullback, that near-sided fullback will kind of push up towards that winger. Now, that winger, so they don't want to give that winger space to receive the ball and kind of turn. So essentially what it is, it's if they can win the ball back in that 1v1 duel, fantastic, great. They can counter, they can go ahead. But the main idea is to allow the other fullback and the two center backs to kind of come together, create a back three, and kind of overload the number 9, and then obviously the incoming number 10 that's on the other side in this diagram. And the thing is, if the fullback on the right side that's up against the number 11 here, if she doesn't manage to win the duel and the number 11 is able to go past, it allows the Dutch to kind of, okay, we've got 3 players. We can get the number 6 to kind of drop into that back four and kind of keep it compact. And then we have numbers to deal with a cross if it does come in, especially considering the fact that they play two very physical and strong center backs. That's kind of how Sarina likes to play. She relies a lot on positional awareness, so that the players need to be positionally aware and good, so that if anything does come across, they can deal with it physically, and they're always in the right place at the right time to kind of deal with it. And you can see this in, for example, Dominique Janssen, who plays for Wolfsburg, is a very, very versatile player who can play at left back. She can play at center back. And that kind of also, and then you got Stephanie van der Gracht, who's kind of been a steady influence throughout the campaigns, whether it's 2017, 2019, or even now recently of 2020 when they played the US a few days ago. So that's kind of the setup of the team and kind of, you know, the shapes that they like to play. If we go on to the third image. Now here is kind of where this is kind of where Sarina wants her. This is how she wants her team to set up, because they're all playing really compact. If the ball does happen to go through the central areas, because there are teams that they don't always want to go into the wide areas, like I said, so they will throw it center. Now, if you see, every player for the most part has its own. It's sort of a man marking system. So the 8 is marking the 8, the 4 is marking the 9, the 3 is marking the 10, so on and so forth. Because they're so physically strong and they're positionally good, if the ball does go over the top into one of these players, the Dutch will pride themselves on trying to win that first ball, if not the second ball, and then take it from there. So that way, positionally, okay, fine, they've got numbers in each third, but at the same time, they're also able to have this dynamic midfield who can go and press and kind of win the ball back. And I think we'll just get into. We'll get into the I think the pressing, because I think that just kind of leads into the pressing tactics of the game, where if we can go to the next slide. Now here, their tactics in the midfield is obviously they don't run with a high press. What they normally do is they'll get their wingers to tuck inside and they'll just kind of sit there. Like they won't really press. They'll be an annoyance. They'll show themselves, but they'll let the ball go to the defenders. They don't mind the ball coming out from the goalkeeper to the center backs and kind of playing from there. However, when the ball does go in midfield, you know, they're the first ones to go in and press. And I just want to quickly talk about the midfield setup that they have. So they play 3, and the usual 3 is Daniela van der Donk from Arsenal, Jackie Groenen from Manchester United, and then they've got Sherida Spitzer from Ajax. Now, the type of players that these 3 are their specific roles, and it's I think it's one of the most important aspects of Sarina's teams, where Groenen, who in this case is the number 7, she is the pressing midfielder. Her sole job off the ball, which is the most important one for the team, is winning the ball back and kind of leading the press. Once she gets into a position, she will go press the player, and then she'll have somebody either following her to kind of either pressure the same player or pressure the receiver of the next pass. Sorry. Daniela van der Donk, who she's basically the creative box-to-box midfielder. While she does have the creative burden and the on her shoulders, however, she's also a tenacious midfielder, so she will kind of join in from the press. So they do really have the 2 8s kind of play a very aggressive game in midfield, which is why, again, they compact it there so that they've got the security of the players around them, but then these 2 players will kind of do most of their work here. And because then they've got an inside forward playing on the left and then usually a wide winger playing on the right, they can easily kind of spray the ball out to either side and kind of counterattack into spaces where teams may not actually be. But we'll get into that when the other 2 get into the attacking tactics. But for the most part, I think the most important thing to know is Jackie Groenen is a mid-press. She's the main person to kind of lead the press, and followed by the number 8. Number 6, Spitz, is more of a regista, more of the playmaker from deep. She's positionally excellent. If needed, she will drop into the back 4, like we said before, to kind of create the extra person. But for the most part, she's purely there to kind of give cover to the 2 players who can roam free without having to be too worried about leaving themselves exposed at the back. And kind of we can go into the last slide that I've got here. Is when we get to the last, yeah, perfect. So this is a game situation. Let's say this is against the US and the 2019 World Cup final. This is kind of a typical example of the way the opposition teams like to play out. So you've got the compact back four, you've already got the back three kind of in line to be in shape to say, okay, fine, we'll start defending. You've got the number 10, the opposition number 10 out wide. Now, if the ball, so there's two options. The ball can be played into the fullback, then into the winger, or it can be played directly into the winger. Either way, like we said, you'd for the most part see the fullback try and stop the swinger. And now, obviously, you've got a lot of space in behind the fullback, which is a problem. But then you don't want the center back, the number 5 in this case, kind of come across and kind of cover the area, because if she does that, you then leave the 9 and the 4. You leave the 8 that could come in late, space there, and they could get overloaded and it concede a goal. So for the most part, if the ball does go in behind, you've then got the 6, the 3, the 4, and the 5 all kind of dropping back along with the 7 and 8. So kind of this is almost split into two, right? The team is almost split into like a 7-3 kind of split, where the midfield and the defense will kind of all shift back together because they're so closely placed together. And then the front three will kind of hang around in the front. So if there's a counterattack, they can launch it forward through a long ball and then use the power of, usually it's Vivian Miedema, Lieke Martens, and as a Shanice van der Sanden with the pace to kind of counterattack teams going forward. And one of the things that I think that's interesting to me, and we'll get into this a little bit later, is that the fullbacks don't venture forward too much. And I know that Alex and Jess will get into this a little bit more, but it was interesting to see that the fullbacks would stay back and kind of always try and create a back 4, if not a back 3, and conservatively push up a little bit to kind of give some security in midfield. Was that because Sarina didn't have attacking fullbacks, or was that part of the tactics? We'll only be able to tell once she starts getting into England, and with England, she's got some amazing fullbacks. She's got the likes of Alex Greenwood, Lucy Bronze. So it'll be food for thought, which we'll get into a little bit later. But I think overall, that's kind of how the Dutch like to play off the ball and their tactics, and defensively. That's And with having said that, we will move it on to Jess, who will kind of talk to us about what their build-up play looks like over the years.
Awesome. So I now regretting that I didn't make slides because Alex and Abdullah both did slides and I didn't. So there we go. But I'm going to be like the number 6, taking the pass from the back line from Abdullah and basically just crossing beautifully up to Alex, because my stuff just feeds very much into what those guys are talking about. So when we look at like the Dutch build-up play over, looking predominantly at the Women's World Cup and the Women's Euros in 2019 and 2017, the main word that springs to mind for me is practical. This is a team who are not afraid to play the quick long ball out from the back line, and to see whether it's Van Sanden or Berenstein in particular playing on that right wing can just run onto it. I think it makes sense. It's quite a pragmatic way of playing, and especially because the kind of games we were looking at, these are semi-finals and finals. You don't want to be inviting pressure, and it definitely feels like maybe it's interesting thinking about the Dutch's position in women's football at the time of some of these games. When they won that Women's Euros, it was very unexpected. They were underdogs, and I think you can see that with their build-up play. They're not looking to necessarily force themselves on the game. They're not going to take loads of touches at the back and just pass it across the back 4. They're basically going to look to have it with either normally their right-sided centre-back or their right-back, and just either ping it across up to Lieke Martens on the left or Van der Sanden on the right. That changes slightly as they've relaxed into games more. We saw in their World Cup semi-final against Sweden, which was, quite tense, quite a cagey match, but they did, start to get joy over time from maybe just waiting, taking 2 or 3 passes, but ultimately still kind of looking to play that long ball over the top. The really noticeable difference was in the World Cup final, where basically because Miedema was playing as more as a 10, with Van der Donk on the right, and then Berenstein as the number 9. They looked a lot more to play into Miedema's feet, to have her be able to turn and pass to either Martins or Van der Donk, who are making those runs in behind. But, you know, generally I think it's quite different to maybe what we've seen with England, especially under Neville, who has really emphasised a kind of, you know, Neville likes to think he wants to play nice passing football. That's very much how he sees himself as a manager, and you see that reflected in perhaps his England teams, who will wait and keep hold of the ball until that move is ready, rather than, you know, sometimes you watch the Dutch play and it's almost reminiscent of American football. It feels like playing the ball is about like getting that territory, and it's more important to them to get the ball up the pitch away from their back line, and then they are confident in the ability, you know, of their midfield, of their strikers, their forward line, to, you know, even if they don't get the first ball, win the ball back. The other thing that I think was really interesting looking at it is that they're also willing to basically push some of their midfielders up to try and create overloads if they think they're going to win those first balls. So again, especially saw this against Sweden in the World Cup semi-final, that because they've got players like Jackie Groenen and Daniela van der Donk who have the ability to play very well in defence and in attack, that when they believe those overloads are there, they are really willing to push them so they're almost as close to the wide players if they think those wide players are going to be able to knock the balls down. So that is my quick summary of the build-up play, and I'll hand over to Alex to talk to you about their attacking play.
Yeah, I'll kind of build off of what you just said from my slides, I guess. Not as fancy as the tactical things. I kind of just took screenshots and circled around people. So this is kind of, I'm going to focus on kind of 2 or 3 things that really popped out to me on Sarina's attacking formations. And I think here you can kind of see it very clearly with the 4-3-3 formation. You can have the 3 in the middle very clearly, very central as well. And you have the 3 in the front. But also what's intriguing about this is that Miedema usually starts where Van der Donk is at the moment, and Roord is usually where Van der Donk is at the moment or out wide. So you can kind of see the formation, you can see the versatility between the players. And you can also see how high they start their attack, which is very different to England, who don't really have a central midfield as kind of noticeable as this one, and also start a lot deeper on their build-up play. If we can go to the next slide, please. So here you kind of have an example of the Dutch's kind of versatility and positioning. A lot of players, like we see in Arsenal mostly, between DVD and Joe Roord and Viv, usually get to switch, and they're very fluid on their positioning, and the Dutch are as well. You see it mainly with Lieke Martins, Viv Miedema, Joe Roord, and DVD. Shaki Runen sometimes gets in on this as well, and Berenstein or whoever is on the right wing usually has to adapt to what they're doing. So in this example, we see that Spitze and Shaki are on the other side of the ball. In this case, Dan kind of drops into the central midfield role, and Jill immediately runs out to the wing. If we go to the next slide, we can see what happens next. Dan gets the ball. She immediately cuts it back to the center back where they're already at the halfway line. And you can see Joe Roord kind of went onside on the wing. And from this image, Van der Donk goes up to run, make a run in behind the defense where Berenstein is. And you can see Miedema floated onto the wing. Berenstein is staying central and Joe Roord is outside, which is a completely different setup than what the Dutch started, in this case, the second half against Sweden in the semifinal for the World Cup. So you see here, Shaki Grunen will eventually kind of shift where the ball goes. So the ball is going to go out to the wing to, I think that should be Van Lutheren at the moment as a fullback. Shaki will usually kind of float around that side and receive the ball and kind of play off of that. So you see here a very versatile positioning play, fluidity, which you don't really see much in the England squad at the moment because Phil Neville kind of, as just mentioned, he kind of thinks a lot. So a lot of what you see the England players play is very thought through, and they don't really have a lot of creativity or fluidity that they thought of themselves, for example. If we go on to the next slide. So this is the goal, first England goal against Sweden in the third place match in the World Cup, where we see them kind of doing something similar, and it actually worked out because Frank Kirby scored this goal. Nikita Paris would usually drops in quite deeply to help Lucy Bronze in a build-up play. As I mentioned, Steph Houghton and Lucy Bronze kind of build up all the way from the back, which is completely different to what the Dutch do, because the Dutch, as just mentioned, they usually throw the ball up and kind of regain possession there and start to build up from there rather than build up from the keeper. So here we see a perfect example of that. Nikita Paris plays a pretty excellent through ball to Jill Scott in the middle, who immediately turns and gets that ball into Fran Kirby, who occupied Nikita Paris' space. And eventually she dribbles down the wing, takes on the defender, and then curls the ball into the far post. But this doesn't happen often. It barely happens. And the one time that it did happen, it resulted in the goal. So you can kind of see that Sarina might have actually a really good impact on the England team in terms of attacking and fluidity between the players, which they're well capable of doing. Next slide, please. Here's another example of what usually happens when England fail to be versatile and kind of fail to be fluid in their positioning. In this case, Beth Mead gets the ball from Alex Greenwood down the wing. And what the Dutch, I imagine, would have done was Beth kind of dribbling the ball inside, either played it back to the center back or switched the ball over to who I think is either Lucy or Jade Moore. I'm not entirely sure who that is, but essentially the Dutch would have maybe dribbled in, Fran Kirby would have taken Beth Mead's space, and the ball would have started all over again, and Mead would have stayed in the middle and Fran Kirby would have stayed out wide. What happens in this scenario particularly is that Beth kind of gets caught, Fran Kirby stays static, so the Swedish defender cuts off that pass. And obviously, you know, the England squad are cut off by all Swedish defenders at this point. Everyone has marked on. And they lose the ball, really. So this is an example of where England are kind of lacking that fluidity that Sarina gives the players a little bit. Next slide, please. And one of the big aspects that the Dutch have, obviously having a striker like Vivianne Miedema is obviously a big plus. But also not only is she score goals, she also creates. And in this case, you can kind of see how deep she's dropping to receive the ball. She's dropping very deep because, as you see, Spitze kind of goes up. Sherida Spitze is usually the one that stays behind, as just and everyone else really. I mean, Spitze is the number 6 in the Dutch team. There's no wrong about that. But in this case, again, fluidity. Shaki Runen is now the 6. Spitze goes up. Van de Donk and Joe Roord find themselves behind, up top with the Swedish defensive line, and Miedema drops because there's someone else missing in the midfield. So in this case scenario, Shaki Runen gives the ball to Spitze, who one touches it back to Miedema, who finds herself able to drive up the field and create a lot of space. In this case, she gives it to Joe Roord, who doesn't really do anything with the ball, unfortunately. If we go to the next slide, we can see the scenario that happens. Yes, so as we see, Joe Roord tries, instead of going into that mid, like behind the line run between both defenders, she tries to go in front. So that's where they lose the ball. But here you can see a lot of the Dutch's movement. Van Dongen has space to run up because of the space created by Miedema. And now Van de Donk runs into the middle and leaves Van de Sanden wide open. So movement in Sarina's tactics is very important because they leave spaces behind for other players. And because of the positional fluidity that the players have, everyone's able to exploit these spaces. Whereas the England under Phil Neville at the moment is very static, as I mentioned. They don't really know how to do anything else other than what Phil wants to do. You find often they kind of try to force balls where they're supposed to go, instead of reading the players' body positions, instead of reading the players where they want the ball. A lot of the time, the wingers on the England team receive the ball with their back to the goal, which is obviously quite hard to do. And then there isn't any movement in the middle either, which is my next point. It is the importance of the midfield. With the player fluidity and positional kind of different positional plays that every player has, there's always options in the middle. As we see here, there's two in the middle clearly. There's Shaki that's giving the ball out wide and will be another option there. There's also always the option of Viv or whoever takes her spot up in the middle to cross the ball. But if we look at the next slide, this is what England does. So right here, Fran Kirby brought the ball up and gave it to Alex Greenwood, which is basically like a meter pass, which I don't understand why they did that. In this case, Fran Kirby asked for the ball back, which I don't really understand why she's doing that also. And Alex gives the ball to Beth eventually. But what options does Beth have? She has the option to have 3 players that are on the far post. I mean, we all know that Beth Mead is well capable of doing that cross, which she does in this scenario. But she doesn't have any options with the midfield. She has no one to play off of. She has no one to drop into that space that she's leaving behind if she drops to receive the ball. Lucy Bronze is outside of the box, obviously kind of waiting in the far post, because we all know that she's just waiting for that ball to drop so she can shoot it. But this is where you see the difference between the Dutch and the English in terms of midfield and always having passes available, which is obviously, the history with Dutch football is that you move the ball as much as you can and you always have options, which in England is kind of suffering with. And also, Ellen White isn't really a versatile striker as much as Viv. Ellen kind of just stays central and doesn't really move to different places like Viv does, as I mentioned. Viv can drop into the midfield, no problem, as she did in the World Cup final. She can drop and play, and then someone else takes her spot, which I think is really missing in the England squad. And we should go, is that my last slide?
Seems like it.
Oh, well, then I'm done. But yeah, I guess the importance of that was basically wingers play a very crucial role in Sarina's attack. As Abdullah mentioned, in the 2017 final, it was pretty much go up the wing to Van de Sanden and have her chase the ball in. But other than that, you have Lieke Martens, who usually cuts in when she receives the ball and someone else takes her space, or there's 4 in the front. So the movement and the wingers and the strikers are very, very important in this case. So yeah, that's pretty much what I got from all that.
That's thank you very much, both of you. That's very informative and kind of a good segue, Alex, into our next and final section, where we're kind of going to talk about, so ultimately, what does this all mean for England, right? Like, who are going to be the winners from Sarina's system, who are going to be the losers from the system, and kind of what are they missing? And if I can start that off very quickly, and again, guys, if you want to hit up any questions, throw it up in the chat right now, and then we can get to it while we integrate it with this discussion. But to me, I think there are a couple of important roles, and I'll talk about it from a defensive sense, seeing as that's what I've done. I think the fullbacks will be extremely important, and I think the defensive midfield and the number 6 will be extremely important. And for me, the biggest sort of not even a question mark, but more of a question of intrigue is, how is she going to line up her fullbacks? Because obviously her fullbacks for Holland were very defensive. In some cases, if you're talking about a Dominique Janssen or a Kiki Van Ness, they were both almost more. They can both play at centre back. So I mean, for them, they're a little bit more conservative in their movement and the way they operate. Even out at fullback. So for me, I think, especially when you're kind of wanting to create that 3 at the back, and if that's going to happen regularly for you in a game, especially against, I mean, the smaller sides, it's not really a big deal, because I mean, I don't know if a lot of you saw, they played Kosovo a few days ago, and they came up with this 3-4-4, radical suicide formation, which was crazy to think about. But then you're playing a very, very low-ranked team. But then where it's going to count is going to be against, obviously, your USAs, your Swedens, your Germanys. These are the teams where having this defensive reliability and security is going to be very, very important. So I think someone like Alex Greenwood, in my opinion, is going to be very, very important, because this season for Manchester City, she's been playing a lot at centre-back over some established natural centre-backs, which has been it's a key feature of Gareth Taylor's system. So even if you start her at left-back for England, and then, you play Lucy Bronze on the other side, you can have you have the defensive and the offensive capabilities of both fullbacks. But at the same time, if you need to shift in a 3, both players can do that, because obviously Lucy's played a few years at Lyon, and at Lyon they relied on, again, a lot on positional rotations. Lucy Bronze used to move into midfield a lot, kind of playing next to the number 6 over there, and there were times where she did move into a sort of a back 3 alongside Wendy Renard and Khadija Buchanan or Gretchen Bach. So both fullbacks can play that role. So it gives Sarina that versatility of, okay, I know that my fullbacks can kind of do the drop into a 3, and they can also go push forward from there. Jess, I think this might be a question for you. Will building from the back be one of the primary changes Sarina brings, since, as you've mentioned, Neville's teams don't go for that approach? I think it's a question on build-up. What do you think? Rav's just asking that question.
Yeah, well, I think it'll be interesting, because I do think, the kind of pragmatism that we've seen in Sarina's teams has served her very, very well. And I do think it's something that's perhaps been missing from England, maybe at times where they've, invited pressure unnecessarily, on themselves. Even think about that World Cup semi-final, like conceding so early to the US was always going to heap pressure on the team going forward, which is the total opposite of, kind of Sarina's approach, which was basically we want to not concede for as absolutely long as possible and stay in the game, because we believe that, okay, it didn't happen, but, we believe the longer that we can stay in the game, the longer we can keep it at 0-0, we think we're going to have those opportunities on the break. And of course, England did have those opportunities kind of on the break against America. The problem was that they'd already allowed themselves to fall behind. So you're always putting yourself in a trickier position in those scenarios. I think for me, one of the things that I find most intriguing actually is probably, who Sarina's going to prefer in that number 9 role. Because obviously we've had Phil Neville coming out last week and saying that, Ellen White is, still hands down his favoured striker. Beth England's a level below. But
I would agree with.
Yeah, I mean, 1, what the hell? But 2, even if you take that as he says it, I think if you're looking at the profiles of players, Beth England is a lot more similar in her style to Miedema. So when we're talking about Miedema being able to drop into that number 10, into that midfield role and pick up the ball, you can see Beth England doing that. She's very good at holding the ball up, being able to turn and play that pass in a way that Ellen White is often. Well, it's something that Phil Neville credits himself with, right? He says that he told Ellen White just to stay in the penalty area and wait for the cross to arrive. So she's there to score, which is fine if that's how you're going to play. But I don't think that's how Sarina Wiegman's going to want to play.
Probably not. No, I'll add to that a little bit also with kind of playing out the back, is that we've also all noticed in Sarina's tactics is that she likes to throw the ball forward, and she's confident that her team will get the ball back. Maybe not in the first ball, but they are really good at getting the second ball and kind of regaining possession. And then they're then able to kind of play it back to the midfield, who plays it back to the central defenders, who already find themselves at the halfway line. So that's where they kind of start their attack. Whereas England kind of start their attack from inside their own penalty box from the keeper. Whereas you barely see Sarri van Veenendaal playing a short ball inside the box, even outside the box. She always kicks it up Netherlands usually gain the ball back and they're able to build from there. So I think that's also one big difference in terms of kind of the build-up play that we'll see between England and the Netherlands. Also, it's also the strength of people and the players that they'll have. So maybe Sarina will be more keen to kind of build it from the back with the fullbacks. But between the two teams at the moment, between Phil and Sarina's tactics, it's kind of that difference that the Dutch kind of usually start their attack very, very high up the pitch. And they're able to then be more versatile and find more spaces in behind, whereas England kind of get caught in their own half before they're even able to start their attack and actually the opponent's half. So that's kind of the big difference that you see between both of them.
And yeah, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say, well, yeah, like also building on what Alex has just said, part of what allows the kind of Dutch to do that and that winning back of the ball is having players like Danielle van der Donk and Jackie Groenen. And I think what's going to be really interesting is, I'd love to know what you guys think about this, but who do you think can fulfill that role for England? Because, we've had very established midfielders in that team, people like Jill Scott, flashback to 2017, Farrell Williams, was obviously playing in that midfield. But, those are players who have either already aged out or are aging out of that squad. And whilst Kira Walsh is maybe like nailed down in that kind of sixth position, who do you guys kind of see as maybe fulfilling that almost like terrier role?
Yeah. No, I think that's an excellent question, because you look at, we were the three of us were talking about this just before we were on here, and one of the things we thought of was, from an offensive point of view, England have so many options. They've got the different profiles and they've got the depth and everything, but in midfield it's a little bit tough to kind of find a like for like match. And this question kind of comes in very in line with a couple of questions that we've got in the comments right now, which we'll just get to in 1 second. But I think if you look at someone, I don't think there's a like for like for your Danielle van der Donk and your Jackie Groenen. I don't think there is an exact match. However, I think someone like Katie Zellem might be a very good fit for the, even if it's for the Danielle van der Donk role, because for Manchester United, she plays as a defensive midfielder. She's got good defensive awareness. She's a bit creative. She knows how to pick a pass. So that could be one option over there. Maybe if she were, she is mobile as well. I mean, she's not completely static. So there is one. And obviously, we haven't seen her much for England. She had the coronavirus and then she came back. She's now coming back into the squad. So she might be one to watch out for. And if I can just kind of go on to DK's question, just kind of goes into that. He's asking, do you think they have the right player profiles to deploy her tactics properly? In particular, the number 6 role, which seems intriguing. Do they have some of that quality of skill to play her brand of football? To kind of answer that question, I think there are a couple of replacements that can play there. If anything, of the midfield 3 positions, I feel like the number 6 has the most sort of like-for-like replacement, if you want to call it. I think the obvious one would be Kira Walsh. From Manchester City. She is this, deep line playmaker playing at the base of midfield, excellent with the ball at her feet. She knows she can pass it out. She's good under pressure. Maybe defensively, she's not as good, but then again, the number 6 doesn't need to be a very defensive player, just needs to be a very good at positional awareness and decision making of when to drop back in. And yeah, I mean, just kind of take on that, the Williamson Walsh double pivot. Yes, if they were to switch into maybe more of a 2 6s and an 8 rather than 2 8s and a 6, it could be possible. But then again, that comes back to your question of the criticism of her being a very rigid tactician in her system. And again, I think, and I'll get Jess and Alex's opinion now. I think it's because of the lack of depth that she had to be very rigid with the tactics, because of the type of players that she had. Talking about Nelson's question about the Achilles heel being speed. I think because England do have speed in a lot of their players, whether you're talking about Beth England, whether you're talking about Nikita Paris, whether you're talking about Greenwood and Bronze. So I think she may be a little bit more willing to adapt. And one of the things that we noticed was, Sarina she will adapt to games. And again, because if you look at the World Cup against semi-final against Sweden, the second half particularly, the fullbacks actually pushed on a little bit more than they normally would. And that kind of, tells me that, okay, so she's not going to completely say, I don't care what happens, I'm going to stick to my core principles. Well, no, she will, but then she will find room to adjust and adapt. And I'd like to take both your opinions on that. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, I think it's going to be very interesting because I think what's hard to figure out is whether that rigidity in tactics. I do think England have huge amounts of depth, particularly in attacking positions, which you would assume if the tactics are due to just having to get the best out of a team, maybe you can make more of that. Maybe therefore I don't like to say like more positive, more or negative, whatever that looks like. But maybe you can try different things in a way that you didn't have. You've got more options to come off the bench. But the question that kind of sits for me over Wiegman is she's gone into all of these kind of tournaments as the underdog. Like people didn't expect the Dutch to do that well. They appointed her because they going into 2017 because they sacked their manager because they were doing so shit in friendlies and they were about to have the Euros in their own country and they were worried about being embarrassed. Yeah, it was a fantastic success, and similarly she did well at the World Cup. But I don't know if coming to a squad where, okay, people don't like Phil Neville, they don't think he's a great manager, but you're still talking about coming to a squad which have reached the semi-finals of the past 3 international competitions. Like, that's a very different kind of expectation around a team. And I think also the public perception of Wiegman is that she is very successful, which is true, but I don't think that success necessarily equates with playing gorgeous football all the time, right? Like, that's kind of what we've seen. So I think it'll be very interesting to see, can she take those tactics to the next level? Can she maybe, move away from the more lump it up field option? Because I don't think that's going to wash as well in England as maybe it did in the Netherlands. Alex, I don't know what you think.
Probably the same. I don't know. I'm quite intrigued to see how she deals with England because of precisely that she has a lot more players to deal with than the Dutch. Since 2017, the middle 3 have stayed the same, really. I mean, in terms of lineup, Miedema is always starting, Martens is always starting, Van de Donk is always starting, Spitze is always there, Kroenen is always there. The back 4 have changed here and there, but for the most part, it's kind of the same people. So with England, she has a lot more kind of different personalities to deal with, especially as we said, the depth in attacking roles that's absolutely ridiculous. But also, the back 4 have very different styles of play compared to the Dutch. Van de Graadt, first of all, the Dutch are very tall in center back positions, which you don't. I mean, we are tall, kind of in the center back position, but not as tall as them, I think, and not as built as they are. But I do find it intriguing. I think England might be kind of the opposite of what you say, Jess, that perhaps England might be kind of the opening to Sarina's tactics because, she has talked about the way she loves total football and everything, the way the Dutch play, the way Johan Cruyff did with Barcelona. And I think that might suit the English players just a little bit more because of the creativity that the England players actually have individually that they haven't been able to kind of do in the national scene with Phil Neville, who's a bit more kind of strict on what he wants. But kind of going into another question here is that for each of you, which individual do you guys think will be the one who benefits the most from the appointment of Sarina? And we kind of spoke about this a bit before the call, and we think Beth England might be the biggest winner out of the entire team, just because of that kind of fluidity and positional role that Viv would play with the Dutch and how important that is for the Dutch. You don't see Ellen White dropping to receive the ball or being able to kind of drop and hold the ball. She's not really capable of that. As we said, Phil Neville kind of threw her up and to be a poacher inside the box. But you don't see her dropping, and even when she does drop, she doesn't really do a good job, if I'm being completely blunt. And Beth England does have the physicality to be able to drop and kind of hold the ball off, get the ball, be it from the keeper. She's able to receive the ball, hold it off, drop it back, and then be able to kind of build the attack from that. So I think the three of us have agreed that Beth England might be the biggest winner from all this formation. And kind of a personal opinion is that I think Lieke Martens and Beth Mead might be a good kind of trade-off. They have very similar style plays in terms of that they like to dribble on players. They like to attack. They like to go 1v1, and they're both capable of shooting. So Lieke Martens' role in the Dutch team is kind of receive the ball, cut in, take a shot, or switch the ball off to the other corner, which Beth Mead kind of does at Arsenal already. She either dribbles, she takes the defender on 1v1, gets down to the touchline, crosses the ball in. She's obviously amazing at that. Or she cuts inside, takes a shot, puts it top bins, like if nothing. So I think that's the only, like, kind of, as we mentioned, Kira Walsh and Shirley Spitze, and then Beth Mead and Lieke Martens are kind of the two that kind of have the very similar style of plays that we might see kind of have the same role as the Dutch do. But yeah,
the one thing that I would add to that as well is I'd be really intrigued to see whether Georgia Stanway could become a bit of a Daniela van der Donk, because I think both at Man City and at England, we've never really seen her play in a position that quite fits for her, because I think she does suit a 10, and neither of those teams really play with a 10 kind of role. And I think it was interesting when City played United recently that she did a really good defensive job up against Onabache. And that was the first time for me that I felt, aside from when she pulled Tobin Heath's hair, which I hated and is kind of why I hate her still. But it was kind of the first time for me where I felt like I'd seen her be able to do kind of a defensive role, whereas before I felt like she kind of just floated around games. But she's clearly got enormous quality. She's obviously a very, very talented player, and I think if she's very young still, if she is going to continue in that defensive direction, maybe that's kind of a role that Wiegman might be able to find space for her, which I think would be really good for England.
I think Ella too can kind of maybe fit that role. The way she's been doing at United, so the way Casey Stoney kind of sets up at United is the front three, and then kind of have a floating 10 in behind. But Ella Toon usually plays that role, and she's usually caught up. It's usually a top four, really, one pressing and one attacking. So perhaps she can maybe, I mean, I'm sure we've seen her change from last season to this season. It's been a huge change, and that's just because Casey Stoney told her what to work on, and she worked on it, and look where she is now. So perhaps that could be the same with Sarina. I asked her today, actually, at the press conference. I was like, has Shaki told you anything about Sarina and the way what she likes? But I didn't get any gossip on that. I'm sorry, guys. She kind of turned me down. But yeah, Ella Toon could also be an interesting match to that.
Let's be real, we're just waiting for Casey Stoney to become England manager anyway.
Oh my God. If that happens. I don't know. What if it ruins Casey Stoney? Like, she goes crazy and we'll never be able to see her and respect her as much again.
Only time will tell. Just to kind of, I just want to, there's one question that was asked a couple of minutes ago. I just want to go into that. And Nelson, I will say that your question on which player will benefit the player who will benefit the most from Sarina is Leah Williamson, moving her to a midfield number 6 role. And I kid you not, in my notes as we speak, I have in my notes Leah Williamson replacing Spitzer as an option. So I think good thing that we think alike. I think it's an option because obviously we've seen her play as a defensive midfielder for Arsenal, and she's got the passing range, but she's also got that defensive, the defensive mindset from being a centre back. So there is a call to even, depending on the game, she could kind of play the Julia Ertz role that they do for the United States team. She could do that, going forward, especially when they want to play this, 3 players up front and then the rest of the team kind of defending when they do. And speaking of which, Alok, your question on the director of sport GM being okay with Sarina trying to change their build-up style, I will let the two journalists answer that question because that's more their line of work. However, if I had to give my 2 cents, I think that there would have been some discussion on her kind of bringing in her style in some capacity as well, whether it be, I don't think it'll be wholesale changes, but maybe I think there is definitely going to be a strong element of her style coming in because England really haven't benefited from the current style of play, right? So to me, it only seems logical if you're going to pick a manager that is system-based like Sarina is, there's you're not going to force her into a style of play that's kind of currently there and almost hasn't worked up until now. But okay, you can argue it's the inability of Phil Neville to kind of get the best out of them in that style. However, her style and the kind of style that they have is slightly different. And obviously, we need to answer a couple of questions. Was she using that style based on the squad that she had? Will she change it based on the players that she has now? I think ultimately we'll see a mix of the two. But I will take the other two opinion on that as well. And kind of just quickly on the captaincy, Katie. I don't know. I mean, usually when new managers come in, they kind of keep the same captain. But in this case, it kind of depends on whether she values Steph Houghton as her main center back. Obviously, she wants someone physically imposing, and Steph is. But then obviously Millie Bright, in my opinion, is going to be nailed on. I think she'll be the first name on the team sheet in terms of the defenders. Who her partner is going to be is a question mark. If Houghton isn't going to play much, I can definitely see a change over there. But Jess, Alex, let me know what you think.
Yeah, just like, I mean, look, what the FA want is to win an international tournament. They want to win the Euros. They want to win the World Cup. And I think, we've seen from moving from Mark Sampson to Phil Neville that I don't think they're particularly wedded to any style. And also kind of, as Abdullah said, like the appointment of Sarina Wiegman will have involved, I'm sure, a lengthy process of her explaining her tactical vision for the team. So, I don't think there is any like worry about how that's going to significantly change. In terms of captaincy, I think it will be very interesting because it is an opportunity when a new manager comes in to kind of shake things up a bit. It's obviously a lot harder, like just on a personal level, to turn around and tell someone who was your captain that you don't want them anymore. It's a bit different. I think when someone's new coming in and there's maybe a recognition, they're looking to freshen stuff up. And I think what's important to remember and consider is that Wiegman's not becoming manager tomorrow. She's not becoming manager for like another 9 months. So I think in terms of what, the England squad looks like, especially considering that we can probably assume that at least a majority of probably players who will go to the Olympics will be English, that I think it's entirely possible also that, the sands just might have shifted even more by that point, and what would feel right now like a kind of intense decision, e.g. stripping Houghton of the captaincy effectively, might not even feel such a bigger deal then. I don't know, I could be wrong, but 9 months is a long time in football, and yeah, I can totally see different candidates rising to the top of the pile.
Yeah, I think I could really agree with that. I mean, on my very personal opinion, I don't really see why Steph Houghton is still starting for the Lionesses. She was, it's nothing, it's not taking away from the player that, she was and the player that she is and the person that she is off the pitch as well and everything that she's gone through personally. But I don't think that she is at the top of her game. And, it's not that she's doing bad. I mean, it is that she is doing bad, but there's just better people on the bench than the way she's performing at the moment. And it's nothing against her personally, but I just think she isn't the best player at the moment that England have that can play in that centre back position. She could have, a few years ago, she would have fit Sarina's tactics perfectly. She's a centre back that gets the ball in and throws it up. We've seen, she is well capable of throwing up the ball to down the line for someone to chase onto. That's one of her biggest strengths. But as of lately, I've seen her kind of giving the ball away quite a lot. She's incapable of doing, small passes into the midfield. The amount of turnovers that she kind of forces is quite a lot for a center back, because then initially you turn the ball over and then they're attacking you right away. And it's just what I've observed. And there is a lot of better players on the bench. And as Jess mentioned, it is 9 months from now. So even, Leah Williamson is still young. Millie Bright doesn't have as much maybe international experience as maybe she would like, because, Phil Neville never really fancied her for some reason. And you have other players like Lottie Wiegman, who's kind of going up the ranks at the moment. Abby McManus as well. She hasn't really played much this season, but she is a great option. I don't think it's a starting option, but it is another great option. So I wouldn't be surprised if, as Abdullah mentioned as well, is that if Steph doesn't really play that much, it wouldn't be surprising if she gets stripped of her captaincy, just to have a more vocal presence onto the pitch. But I personally don't really want Steph Houghton part of the starting lineup, with the potential that there is on the England bench at the moment.
Fair enough. And kind of having said that, I think we are just running out of time because we've just hit the hour mark. But listen, I appreciate, I think from the three of us, we appreciate everybody for joining in. It's been fun. It's been enjoyable. Honestly, three of us super nervous before this started. No clue whether one person was going to show up or 50 people were going to show up. So the 18 that we have, absolutely fantastic. Listen, we appreciate every single one of you. And if there's anything you two want to say before we go.
Yeah, thanks guys. Thanks for coming. It's been great to have the chat.
Yeah, it was. Hopefully we can do, maybe we're thinking about planning maybe a couple more of these, as if a bit more people are interested in it. But yeah, thank you all for kind of watching us ramble on for the past hour.
Yeah, this is what we love to do. And if you guys want more, let us know, and we can. We're definitely keen to do more if this is something that will interest everybody. But listen, appreciate it. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you guys on Twitter.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks.
Take care.